Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today with Film Roundtable. My name is Maria Prieto, and I am absolutely thrilled to have the two guests that we have on today. But before I introduce them, I'm going to lead us through a moment of silence to commemorate all of the lives that have been lost due to COVID-19 this year. We're recording this on December 20th, 2020, and that number as of today is 317,043 deaths in the US alone. We'd also like to honor all of our Black and Brown brothers and sisters, as well as our First Nation brothers and sisters, whose lives have been taken by the hands of police brutality and other senseless acts of violence. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. All right, let's jump in. So today we have Nico Aguilar and Rodrigo Prieto. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I quickly want to give a little backstory. Both of these gentlemen are cinematographers and are very, very close to my heart. They're people I respect tremendously, both as artists and humans. And Nico and I went to film school together. I was fortunate enough to meet him and convince him to shoot a couple of projects of mine. And immediately there was just this rapport between us that I was like, this is what it should feel like to work with a cinematographer, to have a team. And then shortly during one of my screenings, he met my father, and then this friendship and working relationship started between them. So Nico, why don't you tell us a little bit about the first time you guys worked together?
First time I worked with you, Rodrigo, was it's a commercial for Acura. And it was an extremely exciting project. And honestly, it was the best project to kind of like hit the ground running, because I feel like I might have just graduated film school at that point, and I get a call that Rodrigo wants me to do second unit for this commercial called Up. And so we set up a meeting, and I go and meet with the director and with Rodrigo. And as I'm in the meeting, I realized that this isn't going to be shot on a stage. This isn't going to be, at least for my unit, this isn't going to be, shot in Los Angeles. It just starts enveloping as something incredibly exciting. And it ended up being a project where me and the partner that I was teamed up with from production, we went from LA to San Francisco through the sequoias and the city and everything on a Mustang, shooting with a camera pointing up, because the whole commercial called Up is about what you can see from from a passenger perspective in this new car, and all the experiences and amazing views you can see from the roof of the car that was all made of glass. And that couldn't have been a better project to be a part of, because not only was that an incredible experience, but it taught me two things that were super important to collaborate. And I think those were a good foundation to continue learning and continue working with you, Rodrigo. One of them was communication, being able to understand how you are communicating sort of the shots that you needed and the director's shots. But the other thing was also how to best interpret that as an artist myself, and how to make decisions by myself that can look for the best for the project. And I really feel like in a project that, this project took a few days to shoot and everything, I was able to practice both of those things very well, and send documentation and send snapshots and receive feedback. But also I was able to express myself, and that was extremely rewarding.
I love that you said that, because I mean, apart from inviting you guys on, because I love talking to you, you two recently collaborated on the Glorias together. Nico, you as a second unit DP, and Rodrigo, you as a cinematographer. So I definitely want to jump into that. But, Rodrigo, this is what, your third or fourth project with Julie? Is that correct?
Yes, yes. With Julie Taymor, I first did Frida, and then we did this play that I actually photographed a play that she did, Midsummer Night's Dream, in Brooklyn, and then the Glorias. So it's actually 3.
Okay, it's 3. Well, could you talk a little bit about how you formed a relationship with Julie and walk us through a little bit of the creative process that you have had in each of your projects?
Well, yes, Julie is an incredibly talented director and visualist. So it's thrilling to collaborate with her because it's the language is very visual. She certainly is in touch with the emotional content of a story and the performances and the actors, all this stuff. But she communicates through images. You can see it in her plays and all her movies, and she has very good ideas and very specific ideas. But she's also very open to her team bringing their own ideas and also, well, just from a technical standpoint, how to solve these images, how to create them, how to make them actually come to fruition. But it was thrilling. I remember in Frida sitting down with her and just going through, especially the scenes that were more, let's say, out there, where we had things like paintings coming alive or things in Frida's imagination, more kind of her internal world, which is something that continued for sure on the Glorias as well. And just talking through what we could do. We weren't limited by, okay, we have this amount of budget and these days. We weren't even thinking of that until, of course, then you have to later on, right? But first of all, we just spitballed ideas, and that was great fun. I enjoyed it enormously. And on the Glorias, it was very similar. It's a complex movie. It has many different locations and eras and decades, and but also it has some pieces inside of Gloria's mind. So that was where Julie just let it rip, and yes, it was exciting to come up with it. And in both cases, but I think especially on the Glorias, there was big budgetary limitations, simply because of the scope of the script and what we were expected to deliver. But somehow we managed, and that was fantastic. And being able to collaborate with Nico, he was a big help. Of course, it happens in movies that don't have a big budget. They don't include a second unit in the budget because it's an expense. Of course, you have to pay a crew. You have to another camera, another crew for the camera and for the lighting and for whatever is, and so the thinking is we can't afford that. But then as you start scheduling and you see, well, we can't afford extra days either, right? So how do we achieve this script in this amount of days, which is the only thing we can afford? Well, sometimes it requires a second unit, and that was a case of Las Glorias. It wasn't planned, and I insisted from the very beginning, we need a second unit. And they were all like, yeah, sure, but not really, until reality set in, and it was obvious that there were things we weren't going to be able to shoot. We just didn't have time for it. And I was just going to say one thing that just reminded of, what Nico was talking about on that Acura commercial and his experience on that. One of my first experiences just out of film school was also a second unit. Actually, I think I was still in school, I'm quite sure, or just about to finish anyway, but it was with Emmanuel Lubezki, Chivo. It was his second movie as a DP, and it was Alfonso Cuarón's first movie. It was called Solo con tu pareja.
Solo con tu pareja.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they invited me, having seen my student films, they invited me to shoot and direct the second unit of the movie, and it was mostly inserts, many inserts of different types. It was this oddball comedy, but it included many tight shots of different things, of computers, a piece of paper, of shoes, walking, airplanes, also many shots. So I had my plate full. I was shooting constantly, and it was just myself, a camera assistant, and sometimes an electrician, and that was it. And I had to figure it out, and I was on my own. And what was exciting was, like Nico said, interpreting what was required, the shots they asked me to do, and then making them, making it happen and figuring out how to do it and how to put your own stamp on it without it being another movie. It has to blend in perfectly with, the rest of it. So fortunately, I really liked Lubezki's style, and I thought I can match that. I can do, lighting on the inserts that will, look like part of the same world, so it was thrilling, and it just reminded me, of that, of when I myself was starting. Of course, Acura was a commercial, but later on we had the opportunity to work on the Glorias, which was full
The
feature.
Glorias. Wow, I didn't know that. That's awesome. That's really great to hear. Wow.
Were you able
And
to see scenes for sort of Con tu pareja to have an idea of what Chivo's lighting from that film looked like, or were you just going off of his previous work?
Well, this was, many years ago. I don't even remember what year it was, but it wasn't very sophisticated where you could send images along or iPads or any of that, and dailies took some time to be able to watch them. So it was mostly me visiting the set of the first unit. I was there often and saw what they were doing. And there was mostly, for the most part, were a couple of things that I had to match. One was there was always green somewhere. Alfonso Cuarón was obsessed with green, so I had to always be sure that there was something green. And sometimes that had to do with lighting too, but with green lighting. And the other part was that there was this type of contrast in the lighting that Chivo was doing that I even saw. I went with him to shoot the tests, the original, lighting and camera tests that he did, and I saw literally what he was liking on the test as he was finding a contrast ratio. So I could match that. It was this very soft sources with a high level of contrast. And so it was somehow easy to match that philosophy. When I saw what he was liking, I knew that even for scenes that I hadn't even been there or had any really sense of how the scene exactly was lit, I knew that an insert would probably fit in if I lit it a certain way. And yeah, it worked out.
Well, Nico,
Wow.
I'm really curious now to hear a little bit about your prep process for the Glorias.
So the Glorias actually what came at the perfect time because I had finished another movie with a producer who was also on that movie called Alex Sachs, and she was so wonderful to see and to work with and everything. But the truth is that I'd been working mostly in the indie world, and a lot of the resources that I was working with in the Glorias were resources that, for the most part of my career, I hadn't really worked with before, except on the movie that I had just finished. So I was very fresh to like jump in and deal with cranes or certain types of gear that I hadn't worked with before, or certain crew members. And it really set me up, at least in that way, to sort of try to ask the right questions and take the right notes. But truly, the biggest prep work was spending time with Rodrigo and Julie, and listening to them. And sometimes I remember when I flew in from LA to Savannah, I rushed over to a meeting that you guys were having, a prep meeting, and I sort of just sat in, and there was a bunch of people there. But in hearing a lot of the conversations that you guys were having as to how to technically approach and creatively approach certain scenes for the first unit, I was able to sort of understand a little bit more of what was the whole process. And then when it came down to like, okay, and this is what we need from second unit, it was easier for me to sort of jump in. And it didn't feel like I was starting a conversation. It felt like the conversation was continuing. And largely that was also in Rodrigo's and Julie's ability to communicate. And that was amazing to me, to be honest with you, is that, a lot of the times in film school and in the indie world, you spend so much time just trying to learn how to communicate, how to communicate a shot, or like I want the camera to do this, but you almost like find all the words in the world to describe that except the right words, you know? And I remember in that meeting, I was just like amazed because I was like, wow, like that's such a perfect way to describe that shot. And then I would sort of like draw it in the meeting and then like add a little note. Oh, he said 20 millimeter. Okay, 20 millimeter right here. Or Julie said wide shot. Okay, wide shot. And then, you know, it was easier for me to sort of like try to ask questions that would allow me to complete the image in my head of what I had. But it's important to also mention that a lot of the shots that I was doing were shots that not only had to be creatively in tune with the beautiful imagery that Rodrigo was doing, but they were also technical shots that had to be used with the VFX team. And that was also a very important consideration because I had to make sure that I wasn't sacrificing either one. I wasn't sacrificing the aesthetic component to make sure that the technical component was sufficient. I had to truly find sort of a squeeze away where both of them were fully satisfied. And that took a little bit more, I guess, planning, but also just being there in the locations and just observing and just knowing what needed to happen, and then bringing some of the information that I gained from being at the locations and sort of presenting it as the right question to Rodrigo, or trying to, right? Because in this whole process, I myself am still trying to also learn how to ask the right questions. But that was sort of what my experience was, at least in the beginning.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting what you said about how you really had to like, how you learned from listening. And I think that in order to be a good communicator, like listening, I think is like the first step towards that, which, you know, when you're younger and in film school, everyone wants to talk and everyone wants to like have something to say about something, but really like taking a step back and listening and digesting what people are saying will ultimately make you a better communicator.
That's very true. That's very true. I think for every department, even for directors, I learned that also from Curtis Hanson. He was a great listener and a great learner. And then from what he listened, what he learned, then he'd say, okay, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. But I would say that on the Glorias, Nico had his job cut out. But a lot of what you were doing were, you know, these shots around of the bus out of time. That was its name, and also around it. What was, you know, happening around this bus. And what was tricky was that even ourselves trying to understand what that bus was and everything around it was a very long process, because this wasn't something that was written very, very clearly. And in fact, Julie is the one who came up with that idea. You know, it was, she added that to the original screenplay. And so that whole section of the four Glorias talking to each other was Julie's idea, but she wasn't quite clear for herself what was exactly happening outside the bus and how that connected to the other stories, and how, you know, we go to India from inside the bus or things of this sort. So we had to just ourselves come to understand it, and because we were inventing it basically. But then there was the other technical factors, as you know, if it's a point of view from the bus, you know, what distance do we need? Say, for example, the car of her father, that was one of the points of view. What distance, what direction, what speed, what height? It had to match the height of the window of the bus. How do we get the camera to that height quickly? You know, and then there are all these other shots outside the bus, and then again, as I say, with very little budget, it was, you know, there were tools that were necessary, expensive, but necessary, again, because of the time. You know, you can do all those shots, you know, in a pickup truck with pipes and stuff. You can do that, but then you'd need, you know, 7 days to achieve that. So we needed a crane with a, you know, stabilized head and, you know, things like that we have to, you know, figure out how to afford these things.
Well, Rodrigo, for the audience, oh, sorry, Nico, you go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
Well, I think that, you know, for those listening who haven't seen the film, it would be beneficial if you could just kind of describe a little bit of the bus scenes that you're describing, and just paint the picture of what is actually happening in the story there.
Sure. Well, the story of the Glorias goes through decades, as I said before, and we see her as a child, we see her as a 12-year-old young lady, and then in her mid-20s, and then in her 50s, 60s, even in her 80s at the very end. So 80s, is it 70s? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, at her older age, the challenge, in any movie that follows a person through so many decades, it's a challenge how to separate these and how to segue from one to the other. So Julie came up with this idea that it would be connected with this bus, which is out of time. It's not it's not chronological or even logical. And the different Glorias, the different actresses that play Gloria Steinem at all these different eras are in this bus, and they're talking to each other. So it's like a flow of consciousness where she is being able to, the older Gloria talks to the child and vice versa, and learns from each other, So how do we separate this from the rest of the movie? That was one of the questions. We decided to shoot it in black and white. But then, is everything outside the bus in black and white? Ooh, but from the bus, we transitioned to India, where we literally have a shot inside the bus where the 20-some-year-old Gloria is looking out the window, and Julie wanted what's outside to be India, and then we are in India, which is part of her forming years. So India can't really be in black and white. So anyway, we decided to have the exterior be sometimes in full color, sometimes semi black and white. So it was a whole process of deciding when and where, how it would look in this weird bus situation. But that was part of the fun, of working on a Julie Taymor movie, is coming up with these ideas, because it's not like like I said, she's very visual, and she has these ideas, but she figures it out with her team, so it's not okay guys, this is what we're doing. It's okay, this is a concept. How do we make it great? How do we figure this out? And that's where we all come in, the production designer, myself, the rest of the team. So it's pretty thrilling.
And Nico, part of your responsibilities were capturing that exterior of the bus shots. Okay.
Yep, I was doing a lot of that, which was interesting because there was no second unit director per se, and some of these shots had talent, had not main talent, of course, but they had extras that had to interact, like a little girl and her mom and everything. And I remember, being on set, and that was actually one of the first sequences that we shot of the little girl. And before I get into that, I just want to acknowledge one thing that Rodrigo was saying before about the tools. That I just want to say that he really, truly set up second unit for success, because he was able to give us the tools from the get-go that were the perfect tools for the job, both from the lensing, from the crew size, and the actual gear of using a camera crane. He absolutely set us up for success. And what was amazing to me is the fact that, Rodrigo, you were able to sort of almost like a chess move, see five moves ahead of what exactly we would be needing, and then giving us those tools. And because we had that, we were able to move efficiently, move decisively, and quickly. So going back to sort of the story that I was telling is, a lot of those sequences of looking outside the window had either, a lot of it was the vehicles, was the dad's vehicle, but a lot of it was also, or a section of it was with these little kids running around and everything. And I remember being on set in the moment and having all these decisions too, because I realized, oh, now I have to decide, because Rodrigo and Julie are in here, sort of like, if the actors are placed right here where they're in backlight, and then it's a little bit happier of a move or mood, or whether I do it a little longer of a lens or a little wider of a lens. It's those tiny little details that have an emotional effect. And I remember the night before going on set, questioning how should I best prepare, to have the right mindset to be on set. And the answer was going back to the script. And I remember reading the script completely unadulterated with any visual ideas and just concentrating solely on what I knew, that the style that Julie has and Rodrigo has, but also just understanding her journey, you know, because I realized if I have to make a decision, if I'm on the spot and I have to make a decision and this is now and only the only information or the only shots that they will have, I have to make sure that they will be in line with the character's journey, because this is a character story. And that was one situation where I felt that was tested because, as I said, there wasn't any sort of director, and a lot of the conversations that and the information that was being passed down was, I was sort of the bridge between. So I, you know, took it upon myself to also sometimes talk to the extras and be like, not quite, you know, better do this different, better do that different. Because I felt that my responsibility wasn't only in producing shots that would work for VFX, and because a lot of it was reflections, but I wanted to make sure that beyond the reflections, beyond the VFX elements, that it was emotionally usable stuff, you know, or narratively usable stuff. And all of that was truly from also listening to Rodrigo and also the respect of Rodrigo's trust and Julie's trust in me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true that on the second unit, it kind of the separation between directing and shooting only blurs a little bit, unless of course
Yeah.
it is a bigger second unit, bigger, and you have a director. But typically, and it was my experience too when I was starting in second unit, you have to figure it out on your own. You have to become kind of a director, DP, and but it's not. The tricky part is that you're doing it for someone else, you know. So
right.
it's always a little scary, you know, that they will not have imagined exactly that, or you'll be disappointed, or you know, and you know, I know that can be tricky. I remember on Babel we had a few second unit pieces, and there was one that became a joke because every day on the call sheet would be the bus arriving into the village in Morocco. But hey, didn't they shoot that yesterday? And the day and again, and it was because the second unit would go and shoot it, and Alejandro wouldn't like it, and they'd have to shoot it again, and Alejandro wouldn't like it again, and they'd have to shoot it again and again and again. this joke, almost a running gag. Okay, so what are you guys doing today? The bus arriving into the village, and what else?
Oh my God. Oh, that's so good. Rodrigo, you touched on this a little earlier about, you know, Julie's magical realism and her work and her art. And in Frida, you guys, you know, you had Frida's works of art to be inspired by and, you know, bring those to life. But in the case of Gloria Steinem, you know, what were some of the inspirations that you guys drew from to create some of those scenes that are, you know, wild and out of this world? For example, the tornado scene that, you know, has very much like Wizard of Oz themes in it. But could you run us through those conversations with Julie?
Well, certainly, I would guess the main inspiration was Gloria herself, who was around. You know, we met her, and she went to visit sometimes on the set, and you know, she's a living, breathing person. So we could, you know, and she's written a lot, so you know, you could read her books, and so that was obviously a big source of the inspiration and the imagery, and partly, for example, in that Wizard of Oz kind of scene that's pretty bizarre and strange. It came about, I believe there's in one of her books, she does talk about the Wizard of Oz, and Gloria Steinem does, and in reference to the travel, you know, in her book, My Life on the Road, it's so much about moving, about traveling, about going out, meeting people, listening. That's a big part of Gloria's world, is listening to other people. And so the interesting part about Dorothy's journey is that for her, what's important is to go back home. You know, she the whole thing is going back to Kansas, you know, and she's in this incredible journey, but she wants to go back home. But Gloria is the opposite. You know, so she does make reference to the Wizard of Oz in that sense of how women have been taught that home is the most important thing that women have to relate to, you know, and they have to take care of home and they have to be home, and that's the women's journey. And Gloria goes against that. You know, for her, it's like, no, no, go out to the road and experience your life and experience the world. So I think that's where the Dorothy thing came into play. And you know, there's also this thing I think that Julie Taymor herself and so many women go through, is that sometimes women in a position of power, you know, making tough decisions, are seen as witches, you know, in a way, you know. So in anger in women is seen as something inappropriate, and I think that's what that scene represents. Is, well, there is this feminine power, which is not only the traditional view on femininity. You know, it's this magical power, which some of us guys can see as witchcraft. But I don't know, maybe I'm just projecting that. That's my perspective. But Gloria Steinem it's interesting, but because she doesn't tend to be, let's say, excitable and get angry. So in fact, there's a scene where she's running on this treadmill, and we did also this abstraction of this road, you know, all these roads intersecting, and she's you know, and there's this yellow line going through her face, you know, and also very emotional moment. And Julie wanted also that scene to also represent Gloria Steinem's frustration and anger, and also the scene where she has this outburst at this taxi driver who's a racist, you know, in New York, as she's going to the airport. You know, so Julie wanted to include that side too. You know, the anger, not just the conciliatory nature of what feminism also had to be. You know, in the 70s, it was you know, adversarial and all that. But Gloria, her nature is very much, as I described before, to listen to people. You know, so she's not as confrontational. So Julie, I think, put a little bit of herself in there too, which I always think is crucial, is for me, for the projects that I participate in, is that the director is in there, you know, that the characters are representations of the director, and then it's personal, and then it grows, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing. Nico, you touched on this a little bit earlier, in the sense that, you know, you mentioned that there were times when you kind of had to, you know, make choices as a DP director, but I'm curious what kind of interaction you did have with Julie on the film.
I had most of my interaction with Julie for the film was alongside with Rodrigo, where they would both sort of discuss, I'd listen and sometimes ask questions. The closest I was able to get to Julie was the last day for our unit. She came in kind of like towards the end half of the day, because they had, I think, finished principal production a few hours before, and she went to sleep, and then she came and visited set. And I think, Rodrigo, that was when you had to go to India. You were on a flight in India, I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it was really nice for her to visit set. But I remember that she came to visit in the hardest shot of second unit. It was the hardest shot where you start on the close-up of the bus, and then you pull back to a wide of the bus. And when I was planning the shot, I realized that it was way more complicated than just pulling out, because I was on two walkies in the car, where I had to coordinate the speed of the bus and the speed of the car. And we couldn't go too fast, because if we went too fast, then we would run out of road. But I also wanted the illusion of the car going fast. So what I had to do was I had to start the truck at a slower speed and the car at a slower speed. And then as the camera pulls out, the camera car goes at a much larger speed than the bus. But as I accelerate, I have the bus accelerating at the same time, so that by the time I get to the wide shot, we can both be going relatively fast. And by then the shot would end. But I wanted to make it seem like the whole time we were going extremely fast. unfortunately, at those speeds, it's really, really, really tough to be able to get a shot static. And then on top of that, I also wanted the bus to be in backlight, and in a certain backlight where I wouldn't get this flare that was just horrible for the shot. And then on top of that, I had the camera being reflected back when I was pulling out on the front windshield of the car, of the bus, and I couldn't solve it with a polarizer. So I had all these issues going on and all these things, and this is the last moment that I can get the shot. And I remember Julie joining us to the car, and you know, the whole time I'm like rushing the team, and I'm like telling them, come on, let's go, because we're running out of daylight, and all these things need to happen perfectly at the same time, but just trying to keep it absolutely professional and cool, because Julie's sitting right next to me, you know, as I'm like coordinating right here, but I'm also operating the shot on the wheels. And I remember doing the shot a few times, and interestingly enough, having the pressure of the director there, we nailed it. We got the shot eventually, and I remember even having to hide my own excitement of like, oh yes, I got it. You know? Rodrigo would be so proud, and Julie's here, I got it. And I remember when closer to the end of getting all of that, Julie the whole time was talking to me about Rodrigo and this and that, and I remember one of the last things that Julie said that meant a lot to me was Julie was like, that was nice, yeah. You know, I have to say, you remind me so much of Rodrigo a long time ago when I was first working with him right now. And I was like, wow, okay. Maybe not as good looking, but I'm sure something reminds you of it. But
The accent.
yeah, the accent. And but I remember that was the best interaction I had with Julie was in sort of trying to get this shot, and we got it, somehow we got it, but a lot of things were going, you know, a lot of challenges were happening in the moment, and also it was our last chance, because after that, you know, production's done. It was like,
and it's one of the first, if not the first shot in the movie. It starts on the sign on top of the bus, right? That's the first thing. So it has to be stable and hold for a second. You have to read it, and then it comes all the way wide to see the full-on bus in black and white. Yeah, so yeah, you nailed it. I knew that was a tricky one.
that was a tricky one. And I remember going to DIT after, and part of me just couldn't believe that we actually nailed the shot, because a lot of things were, as I said, were going wrong. And I remember recording the shot on my phone from DIT, and every time that I'd have an anxiety moment of like, oh shit, did we actually get it? Was it all in focus? Was it all good? I'd pull up my phone and watch it and be like, oh, okay, it's good. And I have to add one more thing, because I think it's important, that the team that we had for second unit, both from production and for camera and G&E, I just have to say that they were truly just so kind, so amazing, and so dedicated. And I remember there's a few times, just out of my own anxiety to be able to produce as much value as I could on second unit, I would push our team to get many more shots than was planned. And as soon as we would get the shot, I would add a variation, or I would add a different angle, or just something, just in case there was an occasion where Rodrigo or Julie, you guys would be like, oh, it would have been nice to get this angle. Then I could be like, oh, but we got it. And just squeeze every little moment and every little second out of the time. And I, you know, to be honest, I did push our team a lot in the day, and I was sort of, as soon as we got the shot, everyone was like, yay. And I was like, no, wait, hold on, celebration, let's get a variation. And not only did they did it with a smile on their face and gracefully, because they believed in the project and in everyone, but they just did it so well. And it was just such a pleasure working with them. And again, Rodrigo, you really truly set me up for success there, because you just gave me all the tools and all the people that were just so perfect in getting the job done.
Well, you know, thank you, Nico. I'm glad that it was important. The thing I've learned, one of the things I've learned throughout my career, coming back to what you were saying, is that it is important to push. It's important to go the extra mile, because the whole thing is, the whole mission of production is to get things done and get them, you know, as cheaply and as practical as possible. That's the mission. So artists have to push, otherwise we'll be, you know, swallowed by that machine. And it's not that they're evil people, that's what they're paid for, that's their job, right? So, and assistant directors sometimes also are in that mode of, you know, let's just get this thing on the can, let's get the shot, and period. Okay, we got it early, let's move on to the next thing, let's finish early, whatever it might be. You know, so I've learned from the you know, the best directors I've worked with that the passion they have leads them to sometimes require or request things that may sound unreasonable. But the crew, what we're all trained to do is to do it, you know, to execute these requirements that a director might have. Sometimes it is not possible, but I think it's important always to push it and to keep going and to add that little bit, that little extra thing. I think that's what makes a difference always.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to add to that, Rodrigo, one of the things that I've learned the most from just seeing your work and being on set with you is the way in which you do that. And I think the way in which you do that is incredibly unique, and it's incredibly special because you do that in a way that makes the production feel like you're a crusader for this amazing image. Not there's no antagonism there, and there's no sort of you know, bad intention. And a lot of the times I think having those conversations can feel a little bit awkward and can feel a little bit confrontational. That's the word that I was looking for. And certainly cinematographers like myself and others in the indie world who are trying to get to bigger projects often don't know the exact way to approach those conversations, even though we know we should push the image. And suddenly you have people pushing it in the wrong way and communicating in the wrong way, and then creating an antagonism with production and then having to deal with that. Or there's people that just don't want to deal with it, and then they just sort of like not push production and not push for a better image because they don't want to be known as that DP who pushes that, you know. But I think what I've seen in the way that you do it is you do it in a way that feels like a collaboration always. And that's really the biggest lesson. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned from you is that, oh wow, that's how to get a better image and a better product, is to push it, but to push it in the right way. You know?
Yeah. You have to. I mean, after all, production, not only, as I said, their job is to get things practically and cheaply, but also to make things happen. You know, that's really the main part of their job. So, I latch on to that. You know, how do we make this happen? How do we as a team, you know, create the best possible result? And you know, so you don't, even though the mission sometimes seems to be at odds, you make it so that it's the same, you know, and you know, you not always get what you'd want and what you know really need for a certain thing, you know, but then it's your job to maybe talk to the director and explain the situation. But in the meantime, you really, you know, have to figure it out, you know, really push and see how, I don't know, I'm thinking examples, some crazy stuff that, you know, sometimes directors have asked of me. In Babel, for example, that very last shot in the movie where we start on the balcony in Tokyo, and it's this young woman, the deaf mute young girl, she's naked, and her father comes and embraces her. And Alejandro one day told me, we were already in production in Japan, said, "Oh, I had this dream. I imagined the movie ends with a shot of them a two shot of them in the balcony, and the camera pulls away and away and away, and the building is smaller and smaller. We see all of Tokyo at night." Okay, and this was a production that was geared for handheld, you know, no helicopters or anything like that. And so it was a huge challenge. There was no way in Japan they would allow us to fly a helicopter at that height. Impossible. okay, so then maybe a drone, but that was when drones really weren't sophisticated at all. You wouldn't get a movie, film negative camera to do that, first of all. But even if we had, it wasn't allowed. Okay, how about cable cam? We put a cable from one building to the other, not allowed either. So everything was shut down. But I had to deal with all that myself before I went to Alejandro. I had to figure it out. And
Wow.
finally, I came up with this thing of, okay, let's put a crane on the roof of this building, and the camera facing back into the building, and with the crane go out as far as possible. We didn't have a techno crane, so it was on actual track in
Wow.
the top of the building. So we went out until the arm would stop, and then keep shooting. And then visual effects took over, and we shot plates from the building across so the direction of the camera went towards that building. We shot wider plates of the building from that angle, and then visual effects filled it all in, and then became a whole visual effect. Anyway, we achieved the shot within a budget, and so that's the kind of thing that I find I'm dealing with all the time, and you enlist production, you enlist everybody in this endeavor. Okay, how do we figure? Okay, guys, what do we do? So then, locations is talking to, everybody to see if there are permits for this and that, and okay, so we don't have that permit. How about this? Anyway, that's part of the fun, I think.
And it also shows how much you fight for a director. Yeah. Because you could have very easily brought the issue to the director and be like, nah, it's too complicated. Let's maybe veer another way. But I think an important thing to notice is that you made the choice to solve the problem before sort of giving up on it and bringing it to the director, which would have been the easy route for a cinematographer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Rodrigo, do you think that's something that you've done, since film school, where you problem solve before bringing the problem to a director, or is that something you've had to learn?
No, I think that's been there all the time. I've always felt that the movies I shoot are my movies too. I don't see it. And I remember kind of arguing about that in film school, where everybody was like, oh, Daniel's movie or Eva's movie, or, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, it's my movie too. I really felt ownership of everything I was shooting. And it's the same to me right now. So at the same time, I do believe that it's kind of my duty to do the director's film and find a way to bring that specific vision to fruition. So I really, if I'm going to do a movie, if I'm going to accept to working with a director, it's because I really want to work with that director and give that person the movie they want and bring my own stuff to it. So I don't know, working with Scorsese, there's, well, every director I've worked with, there are challenges that sound insane, and right. Sometimes, especially Scorsese, will just say, oh yeah, I want this like that. And he doesn't even stop and think what it means, and nobody dares say no to Scorsese anyway, right? So now it's up to me and the team to figure out, okay, how do we put these crucifixes in this impossible location where they would die? The actors for sure are going to die if we do that. And that's what Scorsese wants. So how do we do that with a shoestring budget? That was on Silence, which really, we had no money, and we figured it out. And there it is in the movie, and it's pretty startling. But I enjoy that very much, and I don't know. It's those are the challenges that are actually fun, even though it can be stressful and there can be a lot of pushback. In the case of that scene in Silence, there was, we were exploring how to attach these crucifixes to the bottom of that pit with all these crazy waves, and of course it was very dangerous. But also then the government said, not allowed, you can't touch those rocks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Scorsese didn't even know any of this, right? We just had to deliver the shots. And finally, when we figured it out, I went to Scorsese and said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And then he explained the whole thing from a technical standpoint, and that's what we did.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Nico, you made a comment earlier that I just want to touch back on. When we were working with Julie, she mentioned that you reminded her of a young Rodrigo. And it's interesting because when I was growing up, I would go to set to visit my dad. And I think the reason that I was so drawn to filmmaking is because I would see him on set with just this smile on his face. I mean, even there were times when he was frustrated, but he never let it, you know, dictate how the set felt. You know, his crew, like there wasn't like a running tension. It was just always this levity almost. It seemed fun. I was like, wait, people, this is like what you can do for your career. So, you know, that's just what I wanted to do. And then when I met you, I think that's the reason that when we worked on our first project together, I also felt that what I felt when I was little. It was just, you know, you brought everything with you to the project. You brought your whole heart. And that's just something that you can really feel. So I just wanted to make a note of that.
Thank you.
And Nico, I'm curious, what was your favorite moment working on this film? What do you think you learned the most from?
My favorite moment was truly being in the car with Julie, for sure, and getting that super difficult shot because, mind you, the whole time working on this film, I felt incredibly blessed to be a part of it. But part of me was like, oh, why me? You know, it's like there's so many more amazing people and more amazing cinematographers out there that the whole time I was like, wow, this is, you know, an opportunity of a lifetime because of that. And it was truly being on there with Julie because it sort of was, I was proving to myself that I had deserved to be there. And that was a really, really important moment for me. The other thing, which is the learning part of it that I learned the most is truly, again, sort of like just observing how you and Julie communicated, Rodrigo, was incredible to me because I feel like at the level that you guys are at, a lot of the conversations, you're almost used to communicating that way. But I think it takes a lot of time to develop those skills, and it takes a lot of time to ask the right questions. And you know, I feel like a lot of people who are trying to get into cinematography or who love cinematography, they focus always on the camera and how exactly this is lit and what light they use for this and that. And in my experience, I've always felt that is the least important part about cinematography. It really just, to learn about cinematography, you need to go to the nucleus of cinematography, which is story and collaboration. And I think the biggest learning experience for me was the blessing of being in the nucleus of the story and collaboration of that film. So, yeah.
Rodrigo, I'm curious if you ever feel imposter syndrome, like kind of that feeling that Nico described where you're like, wait, am I really here? I mean, now that you're working with, you know, the directors you're working with, do you ever like look around and you're like, should I really be here? Or have you kind of overcome that?
All the time. I really do. I mean, I don't know now if it's actually imposter syndrome. I think that, let's say in the last maybe 5 years, it's like, okay, I'm a cinematographer and I get this and I can do it. You know, I kind of, but what does happen every day is that I'm nervous, especially at the beginning of the day. On every job, no matter what it is, even, you know, commercials, anything that I'm doing, I feel that there is a possibility and it might not work. I might not be able to figure it out. I always have that feeling. And I have been, even recently, in situations where it's like, okay, there we go. Couldn't do it. It didn't work. I can't do this shot. It's not, whatever for you know, usually it's you know, weather or, you know, production issues. And it's a horrible feeling, you know, the sensation of, man, I can't, you know, it reached to a level where, but usually 99% of the cases, it's solved. It's possible to make it work, and that's what gives me now a little bit of a level of tranquility where I have been faced with so many nearly impossible situations where, okay, what, we got to wrap. We can't, you know, it's not possible to do this or that. And we figure something out and we can do it. I've been in that situation so many times that now I I just know that it's just a matter of kind of relaxing and going into that, inner voice. And yes, it's also experience. You can go back to other situations that have been relatively similar or something, and you can take from that and apply it somehow, but there's always a way, generally, unless it's totally catastrophic. But it's pretty scary, those moments of near catastrophe. Yeah.
You're credited in the film, Rodrigo, you're credited as Man on Bus, because you have a cameo in one of the last scenes in the film. But I'm curious if you could talk about, previous experiences having cameos in films.
Yes. Well, as you well know, I don't know, we haven't mentioned it, but whoever is really, looking will realize that we share the same last name, Maria and I, because she's my daughter. So she well knows that I have this amazing talent of acting, right? I'm a really, really good actor. Not, but I've always enjoyed it. I've always liked the sort of, I've had that acting bug ever since I was in school, like in grade school. I would love theater classes and improv and all sorts of stuff. I always, anytime there was anything to do with acting, I'd sign up. So anyway, that didn't pan out, and I ended up being behind the camera. But I've had a couple of opportunities to be in front of the camera, and one of them, by the way, was directed by Maria herself in a short pandemic movie that now here I'm peddling you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, so I think my first cameo was in Brokeback Mountain. And on that film with Ang Lee, what happened is that there was this character in a scene that was, a Mexican guy who, Jake Gyllenhaal's character, goes to Juarez in Mexico to look for love, right? So he can't just support his sexual needs by, one high altitude beep, right? A year. So he goes to Mexico and he goes down an alley and finds this Mexican male prostitute. So this was always in the script, and there was a person cast for that part. But the running joke throughout the production was, yes, Rodrigo's gonna do it. Ha ha ha. Yeah, very funny. Well, so we show up on that day to shoot it. It was the last day of filming on the movie in Canada. We didn't shoot it in Mexico, that part, of course. So we faked the city with a burro and everything. I mean, it was like all the stereotypes were there. And I'm lighting it. It was a night scene, pretty complicated Steadicam shot that saw, down to sides and all that. And Ang Lee comes to me and says, Rodrigo, I need a favor. So immediately I knew what it was. And no, Ang, please. So he explains to me that the actor he had cast was a good actor, but that was short. And he just visually felt it was weird to have Jake being tall and next to this short man. And he hadn't seen him in person. He'd only seen photos and videos. So could I do it? So I had to go to hair and makeup and costumes and, and the walkie-talkie while I was in the trailer being made up. I was thinking of things in the lighting and talking to my gaffer. Remember the third window to the left of, the second one right on top. Yeah, that window. Put a 2K in there with a straw gel or whatever like that while that was being made up. So I came out to shoot it when they were ready, and the AD starts pressuring me like, "Are you ready? Ready? I'm in makeup." Anyway, so I remember you guys were there, Maria and Jimena, my other daughter, that day. And so yeah, I did this little roll on the street, and it was lots of fun. And I've done a couple of things like that. And in the Glorias, I'm at the end scene. There's a moment inside the bus that we've been describing, where now it's in color, and we see all these people, mostly women, but also men, going to the march in Washington, the Women's March. So, all the women have these pink hats, and Julie wanted the crew to be in there. So most everybody, if not everybody, I think that's in the bus is actually from production and from the crew. So there was, my camera operator, one of the camera operators, myself, the key grip, and a lot of the crew, they were all there, and it was Julie is there. Elliot, her husband, is there, who also created the music, and Gloria Steinem herself is there. I just might have just spoiled this moment for people watching the movie, but it was thrilling. It was super fun just to be there, and the camera goes by and you kind of glimpse each one of us. And so anyway, if anybody out there is requiring someone of my characteristics to be in the movie.
He's very qualified.
I don't know about that. Nico, I'm going to throw this at both of you, but I'll start with you. Did you ever have any other careers that you wanted to pursue when you were younger, or did you kind of always just have a feeling you'd go into filmmaking?
Well, to be honest, I come from a family of politicians and lawyers, and I always sort of loved the idea of law and politics, just because I love the idea of like having your voice be heard and being able to collaborate with others, but not really. I think the first time I was on set, I was 9 years old, and then the moment I saw the cameras and lights, I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
What was that on, Nico, when you were 9? What set was it?
It was first, it was an interview, a political interview that my dad was having. And they brought in the cameras and they lit it all. And I remember thinking they lit him terribly. I remember that thought. Wow. And then I went to set to Gael Garcia's first directorial debut called Deficit, produced by Pablo Cruz. And I remember Pablo Cruz at that age, he was my first friend in film, and he sort of didn't take me under his wing, but while in the production, he was so nice to me and would take me on set and would show me everything. And I have very clear memories of all of them and meeting Gael there and everything. And ever since then, I just felt at home being in that environment, and it just felt like there's no question in my mind, this is what I wanted to do, and I was willing to put everything at risk for it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Rodrigo?
Well, my family, my grandfather was a politician, pretty prominent back in the day, but my more immediate family, my mother was an amateur artist. She painted at home, and my father was an aeronautical engineer, your grandfather. So I wasn't very aware of the world of filmmaking per se, because I did in Mexico, at least, that wasn't part of anything that I experienced. But my mother's brother lived in Los Angeles, and we visited often. And that for me was a magical world in LA, Hollywood, right? And Universal Studios. And that was fascinating to me. And so that's one of the things that got me going into filmmaking. But I never thought it was actually something that I could do for a living. And we used to do little Super 8 movies and horror and science fiction movies, my brother and I. But it was just a hobby. It was playing. It was just a game. It was something we just enjoyed doing. It was later, only when I was about to finish high school, that a teacher told me there was such a thing as film school. Film school. So maybe I can continue doing my little films if I go to film school. Not even then I thought, okay, I'll make a career out of this. What I had thought was that perhaps I was going to go into advertising, because I liked the creative part of it, coming up with stories and writing up ideas that I thought I was good at and I enjoyed. And also graphic design. That's something that I liked. In high school, I used to make posters for whatever events might be happening. So I like doing lettering, and I think that was influenced from my mother, who studied what would now be considered graphic design. Back then, they called it commercial art. She studied that at Pratt Institute. So she taught me how to do lettering by hand. Of course, it wasn't by computer back then, So I enjoyed that. It was something that was lots of fun. So I guess I would have been a graphic designer or a copywriter in an ad agency. That's probably what I've done. Later, I considered being a photographer. Still photographer. That was because I worked for a year in a still photography studio in Mexico City. Nadine Markova was the photographer. She was my mentor. And that's where I started learning about photography. And after that, I went into film school. And that's why I focused on cinematography, because I already had the principles of photography beforehand.
Hmm.
Wow,
Very, very
that's
cool.
amazing.
Well, you guys, we're running out of time.
Oh,
Oh
But
no, boo.
I want to thank you guys again for, just chatting with me. This was really fun. And for everyone listening, you can watch the Glorias on Amazon Prime. Check out the work that we talked about today. And I want to give a quick shout out to the rest of the team at Film Roundtable: Aaron Wild, Doug Torres, and Matthew Wolf. And thank you everyone listening for your continued support. Remember to follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be up to date on all of our upcoming roundtables. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Really appreciate it. Great that day. Great that day. Bye.